Thank you, Mr. Ian, for setting the stage for our panel discussion on our topic, navigating the increased complexity of incident management. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, please note that you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to pose questions to our panelists. Our moderator is Mr. Edward Ian, Managing Director at Navigate Response Asia.
And thank you.
Joining him on the panel, we have Mr. Dougal Aitken, Chief Executive at Speaker Services Group. Mr. Ahmad Nazri, Response Team Manager at Oil Spill Response Limited. Mr. Heyman Fall, General Manager at SMIT Salvage Private Limited. And Captain Kevin Wong, Port Master, Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. Mr. Ian, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Again, and a warm welcome to each of our four gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us amid your busy schedules this afternoon. I'd like to start by, and some of you, I hope you can all see this on your screens at home and in your offices, wherever you are, but we actually asked some of you who'd already pre-registered to take part in a pre-event survey, which has produced, if I may say so, some very interesting responses, which I'm pleased to say coincide with our themes today. But let me read the question out. What is the most significant challenge facing the industry now as a result of increased complexity of incident management? And I think we have around 1,000 people tuned in this afternoon. I'm not sure whether all of you responded to that. But as you can see, I hope from those responses, the majority, well, not the majority, but 42% of you, most of you, had decided that or gave the feedback that the COVID-19 pandemic was our single most important challenge that we face today. I personally tend to agree with that, although we must hope longer term COVID does go away. Second up, 30% of you said conflicting objectives and priorities between organisations. Fascinating, because that touches on several of the themes I hopefully raised earlier. 34% said high public and government expectations. I'm sure Kevin Wong has got something to say about that, but that is also very much allied to higher public perception as well. Frankly speaking, governments are on their toes because the public are on their toes. And then we've also got responses highly emotive and some others. So I find those all extremely fascinating responses. I'm going to be bold and say COVID won't be a long-term issue. And I think that longer term, some of the other responses will occupy our minds in more detail. But basically, before I hand over, I'd like to, before we go to the questions, I should say, and I know that you're all now asking questions, I'd like to run down the panel to give their responses to some of these findings, starting with Kevin.
Oh, thank you, Edward. Indeed, there is an increased complexity in incident management. Personally, I feel that the fundamentals of responding or preparedness has not changed, right? Therefore, organizations, whether public or private, they need to have very clear response strategy. They need to have updated contingency plan and practice, and practice, right? In terms of crisis management, there is now a need for more holistic management beyond the traditional ops responses. Today, the scope of the plan should also include media management, next of kin management, volunteer as well as NGO management, and public and community engagement. Over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, Hemang.
Thank you, Ed. Very insightful presentation and some findings, good findings on the wheel as well. Giving real-life examples here and the complexities that we have faced when COVID pandemic hit to move our people from in and out. And I would give the example of Wakashio, which was one of the starting points of getting into the rhythm of the pandemic itself. Countries were still trying to find the basis of what is right and what is not. We had to sail, or we had to had all our bases send people down to Wakashio. So we had a team from South Africa going down there. We had a team from Netherlands going down there. We had a team from Singapore going down there. And ironically, the team from Singapore had to sail down there because they were not getting permissions to land anywhere. So that added to the complexity. While we could manage the processes with the teams which were already there on site, getting the Singapore team 17 days later, of course, does affect the resource pool management for our team and also affects the operation in a way. Yeah, that would be my 42% input for the COVID-19. Over to you.
Ahmad, please.
Thanks, Edward. Just to echo what Herman has said about COVID-19, I mean, for oil spill response, obviously the key core business for us is to have boots on the ground, to have people responding on the ground. And when borders close, it costs a lot of issues for us to figure out how are we able to do the work that we're supposed to do. So with Herman's example, he was finding ways and means to get his bikes on the ground. We were, on the other hand, trying to find creative ways of supporting our clients through other means such as remote purposes. And we were able to do some cases whereby we actually had provided remote support from our clients from our base in Singapore to an incident in other countries. And that worked quite effectively well, surprisingly. And we believe that that is going to be a mainstay in the future as well. Yeah.
Great,
thanks.
Dougal.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, look, talking in general terms, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's not surprising that the number one on your list of issues that owners have to address is that surrounding planning. Kevin talked about the necessity for planning and preparedness. Both of those things still remain king. The nature of the events that we're dealing with in terms of casualties really remain much the same as they ever have. The risks from an insurance perspective, from a ship owner's perspective, remain much the same. But some things have changed absolutely. The value of these incidents when they occur has skyrocketed. And also the ability for people to access information or to provide information, to be aware of the incident, and therefore to be concerned about the environmental impacts of these incidents that we face has again increased exponentially. But most importantly, their ability to publish that has become, you know, so much easier.
Absolutely.
You know, and that brings us back to those issues surrounding planning, the management of these incidents when they occur, and the preparedness for them to ensure that you're in a position to manage these incidents as and when they occur.
Thank you very much, and thank you, gentlemen, for all your comments. I believe that we now have another question, a poll, a short poll, which we're going to ask all our audience to reply to. I believe that on your Zoom, you've got a series of multi-choice, but let me read it out because I think it's a very good question, and it very much follows on from what we've been talking about in the session. How do you envisage incident management in an endemic COVID-19 world? And while we wait for the responses there, let's go back to our panelists and get some specific experiences about COVID. We know MPA has been absolutely, you know, central in dealing with this here in Singapore. But perhaps let's start with Kevin and talk about some of the challenges of COVID.
Thank you, Edward. In terms of responding to incidents in a COVID environment, in recent times, since COVID, we have reviewed our plan to incorporate calibrated response with safe management measures. These plans are also tested out during the TTX for oil spill response, as well as the recent ferry exercise that we had.
Yes.
Yes. And in these exercises, while ground resources are being deployed, be it in the operation center as well as out at sea, safe management measures are incorporated. But going at a more strategic level, as you are aware, MPA is at the forefront of the policies for COVID, managing COVID, helping the industry to manage COVID, right? We have implemented policy to ensure that the frontliners are tested, right? They are given guidance of safe management measures and then vaccination. So in my jurisdiction, which is Singapore, right, in terms of sending out teams to project sites or to respond to an emergency, we have taken this into consideration and we have put in place measures to enable immediate response to incidents.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, yeah. Okay, understand we've now got the results of the live poll, which is very interesting. 62% of you say that enhanced safe management measures at sites where people need to work in close proximity. That is the largest single most important factor regarding COVID. Reduced efficiency in mobilizing resources, also very, I think Hamang and Ahmed both touched on that. And then more machines remotely operated than on-site operated. Again, a very interesting response. Interestingly enough, nothing will change. I find that hard to believe, actually. Just dwelling on COVID a moment, gentlemen, because it is the key, the central topic in many respects of casualty response today. Hamang mentioned the challenges of Wakashio, but here's a question for you, really. Do you see COVID changing what your company does forever, or is it a temporary phenomenon?
Again, that's a very good question, Ed, thanks. The purpose of being a salvo and being at the forefront of providing emergency services is to be on the site as fast as possible, to assess the situation, to make sure you can manage the situation better, and for that you have to be on site. I give an example again of an emergency that happened in Malaysia a few weeks back, where we, under normal circumstances, would have just taken our people, put them on a tug, go out to the project, and work on the project per se. And fine, we do that in this case, but when we have to come back, we have to go through the COVID protocols of both Malaysia and Singapore. So that really puts the stress on how we are responding, because we are adding additional resources which may or may not convert into a project for us, right? So the question which you ask really is, if we are going to change in our approach in the future, the answer at this point is no, we have not. We still would be going with providing the fastest response by sending our people as fast as possible to site. Right. But at the same time, resonating with what Dougal said, preparing our clients with having information from them upfront. You do by OPA agreements or otherwise, where we have access to their technical data. That, if we can have beforehand, we can prepare ourselves to model their vessel and to provide them remote assistance as required.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
A supplementary one quickly, because that's fascinating. How good is the industry at the moment in terms of that kind of data sharing?
Under the OPA Act, you do have to do that. So any vessel that is going to the United States has to provide the technical data to the preferred salvo. And so that information exists. You only have to provide it out. Now, we have seen some ship owners do not want to provide it. And some people or some ship owners are still having reservations of approaching a salvage company to be prepared for an eventuality that may occur. So, and that happens mostly on this side of the world, where people do understand that emergencies will come in the future or will present themselves at some stage of the life of the ship itself, but they are still having reservations in providing that information. So coming to your answer, we do have resources to do that right now at this time.
Great, thank you, Hemming. Dougal.
Yeah, a couple of issues. If we go back to the wagon wheel of concerns that the audience said that they had surrounding COVID and the current environment, one of the larger sections was concerns about multi-jurisdictional issues. And in many waters in the world, and certainly here in Southeast Asia, if you have a major incident, let's say results in a pollution or a navigational safety issue, it is going to affect multiple jurisdictions. No two ways around that. And how you deal with that has always been complex. You know, people have different emergency response plans, countries have different response plans, countries have different response capabilities. Irrespective of what the plan says, how do you actually enact that in reality is a major issue. And linked to that is this issue surrounding COVID. How do you envisage incident management? Hema mentioned earlier, you know, historically, you just put people on a boat or stick them on a plane and send them to wherever the incident was. We had a major loss recently in a neighboring country, and it took the best part of 2 months to get the necessary resources and personnel to site to deal with the incident because of COVID protocols in the surrounding countries. Right. Now, luckily, that wasn't one that needed immediate response, but we have another one ongoing at the moment, where we needed international assistance, we needed international response, and it simply was not possible to get it there. So the first question here, you know, what do we think is going to be affected? Enhanced safe management measures at site. The reality is it's the restriction of safe management measures, because it's simply not possible in today's day and age to get the necessary resources that you need to site.
Excellent, right. Excellent. Ahmed, would you like to add to what Dougal's just said?
Yeah, so for us, I believe that, because pre-COVID, when we do have an incident, a lot of clients or members would want to try to get together in a room to form the team together. Obviously, with COVID, now that's not possible, and in the early stages, everybody is trying to figure out how to do it remotely. I think past COVID, people will try to steer towards going back to the rooms, but I believe the remote element will still be around. Just so because now people have realized that actually I can get resources almost at the click of a button, and this person is over on the other side of the world. So I think the element of remote will still be around for us to live with, although we'll try to get back together again in the room to manage the incident together, but that piece is still going to be there.
Right, fascinating. So you'd all agree, and I'll go down the line here, that to some extent, post or during COVID, a degree or some of the work which you would have been doing physically because of Zoom and because of Teams and all the other wonderful contraptions that we use can actually be done remotely with just as much effect. Is that right, or would you agree with that?
Yeah, certainly from my perspective, yes. I think we'll talk about technology in a little while.
Yeah.
But if you think about from an oil pollution perspective, for example, you know, historically, the ship owner or the authorities would call ITOF, and ITOF would send their spill response managers to provide assistance to everybody involved in the incident. And that's simply not possible now. So ITOF is making arrangements to be able to provide advice remotely. Use of satellite technology is good. The use of drones is good in terms of providing digital imagery to show what the nature of the pollution is. So yeah, undoubtedly, there will still be the desire when hopefully the world goes back to normal to sit in a room, to look at somebody, to take somebody by the hand and show them a beach and show them a fish farm, show them the vessel. Yeah. That will of course happen. But we're also, I would think, at the back end of this, going to be far more ready digitally and from a technological perspective to be able to use those resources to limit the amount of attendance on board that is required.
Right, fascinating, yeah. Must ask Kevin as well, as MPA, how has Zoom and today's world of remote working affected your approach to response?
Technology, we are constantly on the lookout for technology enabler to enhance our response efforts. Even pre-COVID, we have started exploring with CCTV network on the coastline, and then we move on, learning from ground operations experiences. We started installing cameras on our patrol boats, and then with live video feeds back to the ops center, and then we explored with UAVs and with live feeds back to our ops center. As technology progresses, we will be weaving all this standalone system together to provide a holistic situational awareness picture to our commanders in the operations center. Certainly, the things that we have done previously help to build the remote operations as we move forward.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Hemang Smit, are you, I'm sure, applying lots of these technologies? How has digitalization helped your way of working?
In a way, digitalization, of course, every lot of models that we can do to forecast, especially, I'll give you another example. There was a drifter, abandoned drifter, which was in the middle of nowhere. And we knew the location then. And when we have to send a tug out to that location, it takes 5 days. So in 5 days, where this drifter is going to be, nobody knows, right? Now, using technology and the modeling, we could pinpoint, right, what is the vessel like, what is the draft of the vessel, what is the drift going to be like, and the tides. We could establish an approximate location where we could find this vessel after 5 days. So when a tug does approach that vessel, how fast and how effectively you can spot this vessel and connect it and tow it back. So that's an enabler, right? 5 years back we had, or maybe 7 years back, we had a vessel called the MOL Comfort that broke into two. And we were looking for the forward section because we couldn't find the forward section for a day. So that has definitely changed. So truly, salvage or salvage approaches are also being improved with the help of technology. We have drones which now are passing on messenger lines. In the case of Wakashio itself, we used a drone to pass on the messenger line because there was a lot of waves, the sea breaking up closer. So we had to use a drone to pass the line. That's another enabler as well. And of course, with the vessels, all the technology of ships growing, using different diverse fuels, you have to be also mindful of how the technology is helping them and understand their processes so we can then provide assistance to them when they require help. And so we have to learn that part as well.
Fascinating, yeah, great. Ahmed, my experience of oil spill responses, you're very proud and rightly so of your hardware. Are you a software company as well?
Well, we are moving towards software. In fact, we've been moving towards software for a while now because a lot of members who we help, they are very into the common operating picture kind of setting, whereby in the incident management center where they are at, they will have all the information feeds that comes in from their drones, from the aerial surveillance flights that they do, all piped into one common operating picture, and allows the incident leaders to have a look at as a helicopter view and make effective decisions and be able to predict what needs to happen in the future. So we have to keep up to the times to follow on with this in terms of technology. But as I said, because with post-COVID, technology is going to be a bit more important. We think that this is going to be a main feature, and one of the key things that we will need to look into is in terms of data management, because there's going to be lots of data that's going to start coming into your incident management centers. How are you going to manage those data, and how are you going to make sure that you filter out the right ones and filter out the noise from everything else. So yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Dougal.
Yeah, I mean, in short, COVID has forced our hand as far as the use of technology is concerned that we wouldn't even have considered 2 years ago, really just for inertia, for no other good reason. So it's forced our hand. And with that, with the use of it, that will undoubtedly result in greater demand for technologies that help in planning and preparedness and the management of these incidents. And that greater demand will result in ever-increasing technological developments and benefits. So, in some ways, what has been forced on us actually may be positive going forward.
Right, excellent, excellent, good. Thank you very much for that, gentlemen. Let's move on a little bit, if we may. I understand we're starting to get a torrent of questions from our audience. I have a few, and it's my prerogative or it falls to me to select them. Let me read one out for you, which I find personally very fascinating. Timing remains the key in emergency response for large-scale casualty incidents. For each of the panel, what do you expect that owners and other stakeholders, particularly insurers, should do in order to avoid or reduce a longer decision process? Very good question. I think we should start with Dougal.
Happy days. Look, really, it comes back to planning and preparedness.
Yeah.
There are examples, in multiple jurisdictions. The Singapore example is a brilliant one with the MPA, putting arrangements and agreements in place with spill response organizations, for example, with the P&I clubs, for example, to make sure that at the time of mobilization, we're not sitting arguing about cost, for example, which is a major issue. Yeah. There are differing approaches when you have oil in the water. We spoke earlier about the fact that everybody wants the oil out of the water and a result as soon as possible. But there are different approaches. There are some major oil companies whose reaction would be their desire is prudent overreaction, for example. Others would say no regrets. And that would be the attitude of a government. That might be Kevin's attitude is, let's get resources deployed, and we'll worry about the cost at some stage later on. But it's, the cost is an issue for somebody somewhere down the line. Yeah. So if agreements are in place before you go to war, then that obviously makes it much easier for decisions to be made.
Thank you. Hemang, I'm sure you've got something to say about this topic.
The point that catches my eye is a large-scale casualty incident. It's considered a large scale. So that's why Dougal, when he says cost definitely plays a very big part in a large scale event. But having taken that part out, any salvage operation or any emergency response, you have three things that you go for. You want to save life, you want to save the environment, and you want to save the property, right? Cost comes thereafter. Now, as long as the owners, the underwriters, and the authorities understand this sequence, we can always organize our thoughts together to attack an incident with one mind and in the same direction. However, having said that, the point that also I would like to make is insurers are preparing themselves, and the ship owners as well, to have agreements in place with salvos, right? And in those agreements, you also have the commercial agreement set in. So what would be the incident like which would have such an agreement? That kind of helps. So you have pre-planned all that information to come up with a solution for everybody to limit the response time.
Right. Ahmed?
So we've been a very strong advocate of telling our members, because we run as a membership company, we tell our members all the time that timing is crucial and they need to let us know as soon as an incident happens. We've had several experiences in the past whereby there's been a lot of hesitancy in that, and we've basically looked into how we can actually facilitate those kind of decisions to call organizations like us to help them as soon as possible. So we've introduced a few things like we are now giving free technical advisory in country. We will send out our guys for free for the first 5 days, so that cost doesn't become an issue to the members themselves, so that it's not a stumbling block, and they'll call us they can get the right advice as soon as possible. In terms of for the shipping organizations, we used to have third-party contracts that were lengthy in T&Cs, which we didn't want to get hung up in that. So we've changed those contracts to suit contracts that are familiar. So we've tied up with BIMCO, we've come up with the response con, which will make it easier for shipping companies to then call us in to mobilize us. So these are the things that we are doing now to ensure that we meet the timing requirements of an incident.
Fascinating. Kevin, would you have something to add to that?
I thought Duga has already said
You-
all.
he said-
But
he took
true
what you-
enough,
yeah,
true
that's
enough,
fine, that's
responding
absolutely
to
fine, yeah.
emergency, timing is key,
Yeah.
right? Which is why MPA in Singapore, the incident manager for marine incidents such as oil spill and chemical spill is MPA, right? And we take leadership. We are also the first responder on site.
Yes.
To ensure that resources are on site ASAP, we have forward deployed spill response equipment. We have a framework where the hovercrafts are required to carry spill response equipment to support the government's effort. We have stockpiles of dispersants and booms, right? As Duga has put it, to ensure that the ship owners don't waste time with negotiating the contracts and so on, we have agreed rates with through an MOU with ITOF.
Right.
Right. As an incident manager myself, my petrocraft, my latest generation of petrocraft, are equipped with spill response equipment, right? And demonstrating leadership, we are the first movers, and then we won't waste time contacting the non-essential parties. We'll pick up the phone and call the P&I correspondents. That is the first person that we talk to.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
And the other thing, you know, from a Singaporean perspective, Kevin's right. I mean, the MPA is very proactive and very positive and very firm in making its decisions that it thinks needs to be made. But they are consultative, which is also obviously very important.
Yeah.
Kevin touched much earlier on the fact that you know, we're talking about technology and digital imagery. I mean, Kevin can sit at his desk and see almost every single bit of Singapore's port waters, which makes it incredibly easy for us when we sit down last thing at night, first thing in the morning, when we've got a casualty ongoing, and for the port to say, look, we have oil in the water here, there, and the next place, which when it comes to the mobilization of resources, bear in mind, we've already got rates agreed. When it comes to the mobilization of resources, all of that just makes the whole process so much easier.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. Next question, which is number 7 on my iPad. Perhaps if we'd like to flash that up, and I'll read it. In an incident, salvors would usually be required to give a quick assessment before providing the quotes and possible solutions. One for the panel. What alternative measures could be adopted when there's travel limitations due to COVID-19 protocols? Back to COVID, but we must go back to COVID. Yeah, Kevin?
Okay. In terms of what are the responses, as I mentioned earlier on, MPA being the incident manager, we are always with the first responder. In our response plan, right, we tiered the response level based on level tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 spills. And in our plans, there are response resources calibrated for different tiers so as not to over cater or under cater for a situation. Correct. And then until such time where by the time the salvors are appointed or arrive on site, by which time we would have stabilized the situation before handing over, or they will work together with us to stabilize the situation.
Excellent. Yeah. Hamang, would you like to add to that?
Yes,
with that
of course.
question in mind?
This is, again, a question that is at the core of cost, right? And in my opinion, we historically, even before COVID and long before COVID, we have a contract which serves this purpose, which is called the Lloyd's Open Form.
Yeah.
Right? You put in your resources as much as possible to mitigate the solution, and if you perform, you get rewarded. It's a risk and reward equation.
Very much.
We have been guiding ship owners in situations which are developing fast to consider Lloyd's Open Form, while at the same time working with authorities, like in this case MPA, or in the case of the ones in Sri Lanka, like the New Diamond, we were working with Sri Lankan authorities and Indian authorities who were the first responders to site to make sure and mitigate the situation till we arrive at site.
Fascinating. Just from my perspective, slight curveball for you, but you mentioned Lloyd's Open Form. We all know there's lots of debate about the future of that. Is it fit for purpose? What's your view?
Given the situation, it is fit for purpose. I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah.
in simple terms, it is definitely the way to go forward, because it's not that it's not that a salvo is going in there with all the resources and getting things done. It is also to save the environment and the property, right? And sometimes it is easier for salvos to do their job first and then talk later, than to have a dialogue with ship owners, insurers, authorities, and align them to what we intend to do, because everybody may have their own ideas of how things will develop.
Yeah. Ahmad, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'm not from obviously the salvage industry, but from OSPIL point of view, especially for my organization, I mean, we keep our rates very public. It's out there in our company website. It's by days. So the key thing for us is actually to understand how serious the situation is, and over the phone we could actually provide some sort of technical advice. And we usually do spill modeling to ensure that we understand where the spill could be headed. So that would probably give us an idea of what sort of equipment is needed and a rough idea of cost as well. But obviously costs in the big grand scheme of things in terms of oil spill, all the other costs will remain small compared to the cost of actually cleaning up the oil itself. So that's we need to keep that into context as well.
Dougal.
Yeah, Hemant's bag, really, but what he said is right. I mean, imagine the Lloyd's Open Form, in some eyes is not considered ideal, not considered a particularly elegant solution, but it does provide the ability to get resources to site, to save lives potentially, save assets, save the environment. And often you get to a situation where you can have multiple contracts. You can have an initial contract at an initial stage to get out to the vessel, to secure those things that we're talking about as being critically important, and deal with that initially, and then a subsequent follow-on contract can be renegotiated once the situation is stable. Now that is probably a situation, if this COVID situation continues, that we'll see more of, because the difficulty for Hemant, and other salvors is that they will be increasingly reliant on third-party information as to the situation on board the vessel.
Yes.
And that can be a dangerous thing for everybody. If you take a vessel situation, where is that information going to be coming from? It's going to be coming from the master of the vessel, be coming from the owners of the vessel, and their advice, their information that they're provided might not necessarily be aligned with exactly what it is that the salvor needs to see at that critical time. So yeah, I mean, as it stands at the moment, I think it's a tool that we need.
Excellent. Yeah, we've all mentioned the C word, cost, and usually it doesn't always follow, but it usually follows that when things get more complex in shipping, costs go up. Maybe not one for Kevin, but for the three of our commercial friends here, how do we keep costs under control, or do we just assume that the insurers will always pick it up? Let's start with Hemang.
That's an interesting question. No, the insurers will not always pick it up, unfortunately. But the point is, the cost is a driver. And it's always on the higher side when you are doing emergency response. We call it the dry salvage, right? The emergency response. When you flip it around and go to the wet salvage, when you're talking about wreck removal operations, the cost driver can definitely be worked on, because you have time to go for tenders, you have time to look at all the other salvos and their solutions. But when you're going for an emergency response, generally, we have to come up to an agreement of who we are putting on and why are we putting them on, and what solutions are we going to provide to them. And that's where, coming to what Dougal said about the part of the intermediate contract between the dry and the wet, that's a gray area, but your guys are there on site by then, and you can definitely work on with the scenarios on hand.
Ahmed, costs.
So from us, I think launching an effective response is critical in reducing cost. And what I mean by that is that we need to be in conversation with all the key stakeholders to ensure that the response plans or response strategies that we're going to adopt will be fit for purpose and will suit the needs of the incident. And we're not going to throw every piece of kit that we have in the stockpile there to just show that we're doing something. If the oil spill is going to an island, we're not going to boom the entire island. That's how we reduce costs. We have to make key effective decisions, and that has to be part in consideration with all the key stakeholders, like ICOPCE, like the incident managers and all that.
A key issue here, Ed, is trust as well. Matt talks about, we're not going to mobilize every bit of equipment that we've got.
Sure.
But historically, you talked about, about the industry, Ed, looking at shipping and always blaming shipping. But at the same time, historically, shipping would look at the providers we have here on the panel and think, what are they up to? And there was a fundamental lack of trust.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the cost issue, I mean, you very nicely left Kevin out of this equation. But part of the reason that costs are escalating is not Singapore specifically, but in certain jurisdictions around the world, the demands that are being made on ship owners by the authorities are going through the roof. And that has a definite and direct impact on cost.
Thank you for that. Excellent, yeah. Right, there's a question here for me, but I'd like everyone to answer it. You mentioned, this is reference to me, training in relation to incident management, very important part of this. Based on our experience, or my experience, can you share with us what type of training you would like to see for shipping companies? And I don't mind saying, because he's named himself, this comes from Nazir, friends at the Britannia Club, yeah. Nazir, that's a great question. As I said in my paper, we are passionate advocates of training at every level. Now, don't misunderstand that. What I'm not saying is every single member of your staff, whether it's the junior purchasing manager or whoever, needs intense media training. They don't. But what we say is every single person in the industry, either ashore or at sea, needs some kind of basic training to understand, excuse me, that shipping is a risk business, and because we exist in a risk business, we need to be aware of intrusion in times of stress, and the fact that we need to know our own roles in terms of what to say and what not to say when there is a problem. This is not heavy 3-day management breakout sessions. This is basic, simple training which gives people an understanding at every level of a company of their role in an incident. Most of the mistakes I see, most of the trouble that owners and the industry get into is when staff are not trained, and they either act with hostility towards the media or they say the wrong things. And this is immensely damaging. But I'd like to open the floor to the four of you as well. Dougal.
This specific issue about training your staff to deal with the media has changed a lot for us. You mentioned the ICOPCE 25 years ago or whatever it was, and we had a standard rule in our organisation at that time that if anybody from the press called, the only person that could speak to them was me. But the reality was I had no media training, and as you'll know, even if you just say nothing, I can't comment on that, that can be as damaging as saying, as saying something.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, is that obviously it is important to understand how to deal with questions. The MPA, from a ship owner's perspective, does a wonderful job when they have a major casualty. The MPA will have a press conference every afternoon, and they will be very factual. There's no emotion in it. Very factual as to what is going on in the port waters at the material time. Very useful for a ship owner. The ship owner might still have to deal with issues at home, in their own country or around the world, but from a local perspective, the MPA does a very good job of that. The extension to that, when you're talking about kind of casualty management, there's a real danger when you've got a major casualty ongoing, a ship is possibly sinking or sunk, and you've got oil in the water, to rely on the grey hair and have the senior people in your organization do what they've done in the past because they've been there for long enough. But if you do that, eventually you will get to a situation where nobody in your organization understands what to do.
Yeah.
And so it's hugely important when you have these matters ongoing that it's difficult because time and pressure, but you must use those opportunities
Excellent point.
to make sure that you're training your staff so that if unfortunately it happens again in the future, you have the ability to deal with it.
Wonderful, wonderful. And this is not, by the way, just about media training. Media and public training is important, but Kevin, I'm sure you've got some other comments about training generally.
Training in generally, crisis management training is necessary. I think we spoke enough about that. What I'd like to reiterate is for companies to ensure that they have proper crisis communications training for their staff. Even for MPA as a government agency, we have our own corporate comms department taking care of media management. But there needs to be individuals who are identified to speak on behalf of the organization, and it's not just one, right? Trained to speak publicly, trained to respond to questions from the media, right? Put in place prepared lines for different scenarios,
Yes.
right? And knowing what to say. Maybe not so much for the bigger shipping companies which have very established plans. I would like to emphasize for the smaller companies, if you don't mind my saying, right, to give some attention to this. A simple exercise would be go on YouTube, listen to the video interview, the news interview of the CEO for Express Pearl, right? He had a news briefing. Listen to the words that he had said, the overall narrative, and then the sound bites. Right? If you don't understand where it came from, then I think you need to go for training.
Great. Last words to Hemang and Ahmed. Sorry, we're running out of time.
Yeah, I see that we are on 6 or 1 minute remaining, right? I think incident management is twofolds or threefolds. Training should be on 3 levels, right? Operational level, it should be on cost, the C level, and it should be on media management level. Salvos do provide such services, train people up, like MPA, for instance, authorities, for instance, train them up of what are the different type of contracts. What do we do when we go out on a project? How reliant on our networks, and what do we provide when we can go out on projects? And that also forms a part of training. Last 20 seconds.
Ahmed, sorry.
It's okay. So as a closing, I guess to just add on to what the gentlemen have said, training, yes, is important, but also I would like to just emphasize the bit of exercise as well. And you already mentioned, we've got contingency plans. As the bare minimum, go through your contingency plans, go through a training with them, go through an exercise with them. Don't keep it on the shelf, but keep it live, so that you know what you're doing.
Ahmed, thank you. Our panelists, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you everyone greatly for joining us this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ian, Mr. Aiken, Mr. Nazarine, Mr. Full, and Captain Kevin Wong for your insights and a most interesting discussion.